we're done with school.
Fuck school. Fuck the government. I believe in aliens. I don't care if Stephen Greer ruins aliens. I still believe in them. I don't know if I believe they drive around on consciousness ships, but I believe in aliens, and I'm not going to let Stephen ruin that for me. Hello and welcome back to The Secret Knowledge. My name is Shane.
And I'm Allyson.
And today we are talking about the second episode of the Disclosure series on Gaia, which is titled, what is the title?
Catalysts for Contact.
Catalysts for Contact.
And we're talking about the synchronicities, a word that's never defined in this context, but
I think it's assumed that the Gaia audience has their own preconceived definitions
I guess that's true.
Of what a synchronicity is.
Okay, so we're talking about synchronicities. We're talking about his...
I know the first episode was called The Origins of the Contacts of the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind.
So this is more origins.
This is some more origins. You know, this episode really was all over the place. There's sort of a few main threads you can pick up.
Ooh, well, I'll be interested to hear the threads that you were able to dial in on, because this felt like word salad to me.
This did help me understand a little bit more about the rhetorical strategy behind Greer's content. It's something I've had a problem with in his movies since the first one I saw, which would have been Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And what I've noticed Greer does is, one, he says a lot of things that he does not substantiate. Not that you have to be fact-checking every single sentence, but he says a lot of big idea things. I don't know if you caught on in this episode. At one point, he just says casually, there has been developed societies on Mars and previously on Earth.
Yes.
Billy Carson just
rolls with it.
He
just rolls with it.
And Greer just keeps talking. So what I've noticed Greer does is he throws a lot of shit at you. You kind of zone out. You kind of pick up on some buzzwords. And then at the right time...
hologram, paradigm. My head is reeling.
And then when you least expect it, he'll remind you, like, oh, by the way, like, the oil industry is bad. or like, which he did on multiple occasions in this episode. So what I've noticed, I think the way that Greer is able to get people into his good graces so much is because he says a lot of things you can't really check on your own in a short amount of time. And then he tells you something you already kind of agree with. Like we've said in previous episodes, I agree that the government is fucking weird and I shouldn't probably trust them. I agree that maybe we don't understand the limits of consciousness and what it all means, right? I agree with these things. I agree maybe aliens are out there. And then it's like, God damn it, he got me again. You know, like... And then we were about to talk
about Billy.
Billy Carson.
Okay, so I was not familiar with Billy prior to the first episode, so I didn't go into it having any preconceived notions about him. But as we said before, it became pretty clear that he wasn't there as... someone to ask hard-hitting questions. He seems, and once again in this episode, it seems like he's there to offer a talking point that Greer is then supposed to expound on. So I went into this episode kind of trying to see, will Billy Carson just be a little harder hitting with this one? Will he ask Greer for any context, any sources? Will he slow him down when he begins to go on a... one of those Greer tangents. A Greer tangent, and I think we can determine that that is not the case.
What I kind of noticed in this episode, starting off from the very beginning when Billy brings up synchronicities, it's almost like there's just this understanding between the two of them and also the Gaia audience that there are just certain things that don't need to be explained.
Right.
One of the craziest things...
and you said something to the effect of this content is made for Gaia watchers, so we are to presume that synchronicities is already known as a concept. And I agree with that. Like, I think everyone watching this are going to have a definition of synchronicities in mind, but that's kind of the problem with language. Like, even for a word that the entirety of the audience is going to be to some degree familiar with, in this context, I think you need to buckle down a little bit and say, this is what I mean when I'm referring to this abstract concept.
Well, and also, the synchronicity that Greer gives is not the type of synchronicity I've been made aware of in the past. This is the synchronicity that Greer gives. This is the first one, which is it's a full moon in like 1990. And I think he says he was like in his attic or in his bedroom or something. And his first synchronicity is that a fucking alien talked to him and told him, pick up that which you have dropped. What I've heard synchronicities are is like when you're meditating a lot and focusing on your spirituality a lot, you might see a lot of 1111s. Or like, for example, when we uploaded our first episode onto YouTube, I found an album that same, not day, not hour, that same like minute called Gaia. Like
yes, I remember now.
Like to me, that's what I've been told a synchronicity is.
Should we take it as a synchronicity then that we decided to title our conversations "The Secret Knowledge," and Billy Carson's organization is called the number 4 Bidden Knowledge?
Oh shit! I kind of like his name better than ours.
Do you think he'll sell it to us?
I think he would. I think he'll bring us under his wing.
Yeah, Billy, let us in.
Billy, I want to interview Steven. I have a few questions for him. But so that's how the episode starts, is with Greer talking about these synchronicities that led him to truly developing his protocols. The second synchronicity he had, it may have been the third, I'm sorry, when it comes to Steve, he kind of loses me. He went to a speaker in town who was talking about aliens, and he claims that she pointed directly at him and spoke the line, pick up that which you have dropped. How do you feel about this story? I mean, this is one of many Greer things you can't say if he's right or wrong. There's no way we know if this is true.
I really, going into this 10-part series, was not expecting so much of this to be leaning on Greer's personal testimonials, because there is absolutely no challenging to the fact that these experiences are happening. And that's one of my problems, again, with Billy functioning as the host, because he isn't saying, so how do you know this experience was real? How do you know this wasn't a dream? Were you using any psychedelic substances either at this time or earlier in your life? I mean, I'm not saying that those are things that could invalidate.
I think you were on a good trail there, because I was going to ask you, who was the documentary? What was the guy's name with the tall whites?
Oh, Charles Hall. He has been on my mind a lot lately.
So this is something I started to notice that worries me a little bit about not just Greer, but some of the other testimonies I've heard over the last couple months. So many times sleep is involved. Being near to falling asleep is involved. How do I want to say this? Greer says he experiences this ET event where a ship comes outside his window. He projects himself into it with his consciousness. He looks at Earth. He learns that Earth is named Gaia, that Gaia is a woman, and that we are all Gaia's children.
But he'd never heard that people call Earth like a woman before. He wasn't aware of that mythology, just for the record. He states that. That was...
He says, I just felt it and I knew.
He just knew.
So my issue with this is, well, when does this happen? Greer says himself this is right before he fell asleep. And so I don't think it's my place to say who does or who doesn't have like implications perhaps of like poor mental health. But like I look at someone like Charles Hall, who in his documentary we know a mental breakdown occurs.
Oh, I mean, he clearly has experienced traumatic events that would lead to PTSD. In particular, I'm thinking of that moment when he's in, I think it's a watchtower of some kind, and he's watching his friend who's also in the military. He can't hear them. They're at a distance. He's looking at them through a window, and he sees his friend fall to the ground as if he was shot. And he stands there and he's laughing because he's like, oh, what a hilarious joke my friend is playing on me right now. And then the reality gradually sinks in that no, his friend isn't playing a game. He's just been shot dead in front of him in the head.
Yeah. And Charles Hall, there's one point, not to get too much into that documentary, but there's one episode that he relates where he falls asleep like twice in it. He's like, I woke up, then I walked over here, then I went back to bed, and then I woke up again, and there were more. And it's like, man, when people mix in sleep to their alien abduction stories, and when people, I'm gonna give Greer the benefit of the doubt and say he is trained in controlling his own consciousness. He probably has very vivid dreams.
Well, he studied with the Maharishi.
He studied with the Maharishi. He called an alien to the French Alps. But he probably has a very active mind and very active imagination. And so who's to say at some point or another he hasn't been slipping in between wakedness and sleep and had a very vivid dream.
Like sort of a form of self-hypnosis or something like that. And hypnosis is also something that is always trailing behind experiencers as well.
He also points out, just as a quick nod to any Lord of the Rings fans, he describes the composition of the universe as being made up of different tones, that it's a tonally constructed place. For my Silmarillion fans, that is also how the universe is constructed within the Tolkien universe, which is that at one point there was the beginning note of consciousness, and all the other notes of the Valar began to swirl around it, and from there Middle-earth was made. So I just thought it was interesting that Greer's insight into the universe.
Yeah, like these ideas are not particular to his personal testimonial, but have all kinds of echoes through other experiencers, other types of media. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
I have a question for you. So I told you there were a few main threads I noticed throughout this episode. There's one thing Greer brings up a couple times. I'm just curious of your thoughts on it. Is he looks at the 40s and 50s as a post-World War II time, a time where nuclear usage and nuclear testing is big. Do you find that to be compelling that aliens would have visited Earth, like, because we were testing those weapons? Or for you, is that kind of a, I don't know if I believe it.
So I think one of the reasons why I love alien information is the way it makes my mind toggle between disbelief and hope. If that's, hope isn't quite the right word, but it's something along the lines of hope. And I will say that early on, when I was first absorbing some of this information about aliens, something that really drew me in was the possibility that aliens were protecting us from ourselves, and I think that makes sense, because that's just a nice idea to think that we're going to be okay because someone else is potentially watching out for us. What do you think about it?
I have to admit that, like, it is an idea
appealing,
that I find compelling.
Yeah.
That, like, in a post World War II era, that it would have led to, assuming aliens exist, that it would have led aliens to our planet. If I were to give you my skeptic's answer, I would say that the use of nuclear weapons really changed the game for everyone on Earth. Just consciousness, not of individual countries, but of the planet itself. For lack of a better term, kind of sci-fi. We had a new understanding of everything and what could be done. And I don't know. I do think it's compelling, which is why I wanted to ask you. Because, like, when someone tells me, like, even when Greer himself says, in the 50s, like, we saw a bunch of aliens because those weapons testing, there was a part of me that's like, man, if aliens are real, maybe they were picking up on, like, our nuclear footprint or something.
And when it comes to all of the evidence that exists out there on UFO or aliens, and we're trying to kind of categorize it into things that are less likely true and more likely true, I have a hard time seeing a clip of a video on YouTube or something of a light in the sky and having that titillate me, because my brain just can't even absorb that. Like, it's too easy. It's too easy to fake. So without seeing that for myself, I don't think anything that I just passively find as a UFO sighting on a video is ever going to do too much for me. But what can or what feels more convincing to me is a report from the government, from air pilots. For me, that type of evidence, beside just seeing lights in the sky that are unidentifiable, feels more real to me, because it's people with a greater degree of credibility, although also a greater capacity and motivation to lie, perhaps. But there's still a part of me that sees that as more substantiative or potentially substantiative evidence than someone I don't know on the internet posting a video of something they saw that evening.
Yeah. And that's kind of a good segue into there's sort of two, I'm going to at this point call them flaws, because they've appeared 2 episodes in a row with Greer. If you want to hear us talk more about Greer sort of positioning himself as a messiah figure, go back and watch episode 1 of this same series if you haven't yet. But I thought there was a lot of repetition of being pure of heart, having the right intentions, or the aliens won't come. You were talking about these sort of individual sightings. Greer himself shows a video from a CE5 event, and he claims that even though an alien showed up, it started to go away because one among them was too scared.
Right.
And
despite calling these protocols as democratizing the subject, it's like, the aliens don't like it when you don't believe in them hard enough.
Right. It's almost like he wants to democratize it in the sense that he wants everyone to do it and be on Team Greer, but when it doesn't work, it was actually your fault. Which leads to my biggest insight of this whole episode, and perhaps all of the Greer episodes coming forward, is I've realized Greer is just a commercial. He's just a problem solution advertisement. The problem is the environment's going to shit. We're relying too much on oil. Our society is in the can because none of us have the right level of consciousness, and we're 100 years behind. He calls us the lost century. That's the problem, right? The solution is Greer. The solution is CE5. Like, the solution is, Billy himself asks a very leading question. He says, if all people do this and find unconditional love in their heart, the government has to follow suit, right? I'm paraphrasing, but he does basically say that. And Greer's like, yeah, dude, of course. Like, that's what will happen.
That's like every Billy question, though. It's like I just continue to not understand what Billy Carson is doing.
That's why in our previous episode, I was kind of nice to Billy at first. I kind of liked his presence because compared to Greer, even though he is just setting him up, Greer just always seems so out of this world. Like, Greer in this episode, he claims 2 big things that I also wanted to bring up. He claims to have turned down $2 billion, which he also brings up and unacknowledged. He turned down a $2 billion deal from some military man to stop the whole thing. He also claims a woman came up to him and said, do you know why the government's so mean to you and so controlling to you?
I did really want to get to this part.
She goes, it's because they're jealous of you. She goes, it's because you're free. They're jealous of you because you're free.
That's what my mom used to tell me when I was bullied in elementary school, that the girls were doing it because they were jealous of me. And I'm here to say that no, they weren't. They just didn't like me.
Yep. Sometimes people bully you because they don't like you. And in Greer's case, probably because you're annoying.
Which is not an endorsement of bullying, for the record. Fully do not endorse bullying of Greer or anyone else. I mean, Greer, if you're out there, hope you're having a good day.
The other theme I picked up on in this video was it seemed like Greer, I would call it Greer's insurance policy, which is he sets up just further reasons for you to believe him and reasons that if he seems wrong, why he's not. And one of the most significant ones of these I've seen, I already mentioned the one about if you're not pure of heart, it's not going to work. Greer also posits multiple times that UFOs don't really appear in 3D anymore. They appear interdimensionally. They appear in 4D, 5D. So if you're not seeing them, that's because, you can't always see them, but I can feel them. I know when they're there. I can communicate.
He has so many facts.
I know.
He has all this information to disclose.
Actually, I also have a question. I don't know if this is real or fake or what, but he also claimed that we have weapons on Earth that are faster than the speed of light. Did you catch that?
I did catch it.
What the fuck is that?
I don't know. I mean, that's something we should look into. That's not something I've heard of. I'm not familiar enough with military technology. It sounds a little hypothetical.
Sounds a little science fiction. Yeah, and then really my last observation was the episode ends with a pretty tame, relaxing conversation about law of attraction, where Steven tells you to think about the thing you want.
And we did get that reference to co-creating in the last episode.
Got the reference to co-creating, and
why do you think law of attraction and UFO stuff ends up getting interwoven so often?
I was thinking about this during the episode, and I'm going to say I have a pretty heady answer for this.
Okay, I'm strapped in.
Basically, so step one, we've noticed that Stephen Greer employs a lot of language that religious figures might use in order to get people to think how he does and also believe in his actions. Number two, this episode ends with Billy Carson saying, "Have faith and walk through the door." So I think the language around law of attraction, even though I myself like the idea of it and I think it's helped me at some important times in my life, I think it makes people easy to manipulate because it's vague enough to where like they'll buy into it. And you ask what's the overlap with aliens? I don't necessarily think it's an overlap with aliens. I think it's an overlap with culty people.
Yeah.
People who make cults of personality about themselves. Like, I think they've taken the best but also most general parts of spiritual language and adopted it in a contemporary sense that makes it easy to believe.
It's partially my background with fundamentalist religion that makes me worry, and I think this is part of my interest in UFOs in general, is I am constantly worrying that I have this susceptibility to being impressionable in that way, because I like that openness about myself, but like you're saying, am I just one of those people? It's a very uncomfortable idea that I feel like I'm continually wrestling with, but
I agree. It's hard because when I meditate a lot, when I meditate every day for 2 weeks, I do start to notice, I guess we could call them synchronicities. I start to notice weird little coincidences. I start to notice that like I'm always right on time, or like I run into someone in a place I never run into them in. And I think a scientific answer could be when you're meditating more, you're just more aware of what's going on around you. So like you're noticing things, but you're noticing everything, right? But I also can't deny that like that effect occurs almost every time I meditate for at least a week straight. And so there is that part of me that's like, man, what's going on here? Like there's parts of me that when I really let go of something, it comes to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't want to sound kooky, but that's also been my experience, just not with just law of attraction, but like with life. Like it's weird. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, I obviously want to believe, but I also find myself the deeper we go into this stuff having a harder and harder time hanging on to like the fun part of belief.
Right.
And if that's got to go, it's got to go. But
well, this is how I kind of think of it too. It's like, so we're on Gaia, right? A streaming service centered around spiritual stuff. Gaia's main goal is to make sure none of these people cancel their subscriptions ever. There's probably a Christian streaming service out there that does the same exact thing and employs all the same language. So I think it's okay for us to personally like still want to do things like explore potentially the role of law of attraction in our lives. I don't think Stephen Greer abusing that language ruins the idea. in the same exact way that I don't think some crazy unethical pastor necessarily ruins Christianity. Like, people can always bend things to their will and do it for the wrong reason. And I do think in Greer's case,
and it doesn't, in regard to the cult of personality, it doesn't matter if it's Bikram, it doesn't matter if it's John of God, it doesn't matter. I mean, it comes in so many shapes and forms, whether it's sort of established Christianity or New Age pseudoscience. So, yeah, either bad people or people who are utterly unaware of the rhetorical devices that they use to manipulate people are just going to do what they're going to do, and it's up to us to figure out how to navigate our own beliefs in a world where we know those people exists, and that's a really complicated problem to deal with, especially when there's just so much information overload, not just on this subject but every subject. And I choose to look into the subject because it interests me and I enjoy it, but I choose to not do that with a lot of other subjects because there's just too much.
I think that's a great way to put that. And the last thing I would say about this that I've realized because of our modern day and age is, like, I'm going to encourage everyone listening to this to think of something you just don't typically engage with. Maybe you've never watched baseball. Maybe you are not someone who watches nature documentaries or whatever. Just start searching those things on YouTube so that you can go into that algorithm. What I'm asking you to do is basically switch gears, go into a new algorithm. What you find very quickly is, like, all the content spheres, they all look the same. They all have the same components. They all grasp people in the same ways. And I think it is a matter of just, like, which one are you in? What vocab does it need to use that you're going to understand to keep you there? And I think in the case of Gaia, they're thinking, okay, what are these people all know what a synchronicity is. We got to say that a lot in this. Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I
think a little bit of your ret was coming out there. It feels a little Stanley Fish interpretive communities.
Yeah.
If you ask me, but we're done with school.
Fuck school. Fuck the government. I believe in aliens. I don't care if Stephen Greer ruins aliens. I still believe in them. I don't know if I believe they drive around on consciousness ships, but I believe in aliens, and I'm not going to let Stephen ruin that for me.
Well, do you have any closing thoughts, or do you feel like that pretty much gets the let out?
I don't think I have any closing thoughts unless you do.
Not for today. This one fried me, honestly. It just trying to hold on to the thread of thought and follow the language.
I almost fell asleep at one part of this episode.
I just didn't have the juice.
My eyelids were, like, getting heavy.
But, okay. So what I do have to say is that we did, on some level, back away from this feeling as much of a CE5 commercial, I thought.
Yeah.
So that was a question I went into it with the last one, and I don't want to leave this without saying anything positive about Billy Carson or Dr. Stephen Greer, so I want to remark on their impeccable posture. They were both sitting very erect and
erect
and staring deeply into each other's eyes, and I like that in a pair of men.
My final thought will be that you can also follow us on Twitter at The Secret Knowledge HQ. You can follow me at Frog by Frog Blog. I know it's not my real name. It's a long story. And would you like to plug your Twitter or not?
You can follow me at the Haha Pachamama if you want to see my one alien poem posted to my Twitter page.
And I think that'll do it for us today. Stay tuned for episode 3. We're going to be recording just in a couple days from now. So if you're listening to this, it's very likely that the next episode of our coverage of Disclosure will be coming out very soon. Please remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. Leave us a dislike. Tell us that Greer's your hero. And we would still love to talk to you about him. So thank you so much, guys. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.